My dog smelled the lawsuit before I did. By the time Karen's lawyer stepped out of his shiny black SUV, my border collie, Scout, was already growling, hackles up, like he could sense the arrogance wafting off the man's pressed suit. I leaned against the porch railing of my Montana ranch, squinting into the dusk, wondering what kind of fool thought they could waltz onto my land and throw legal threats at a man who'd spent 30 years dismantling cases in courtrooms sharper than their cufflinks. Karen stood beside her lawyer, her blonde bob immaculate, her arms crossed like she owned the horizon. She didn't, of course. She owned the McMansion across the valley, part of the new HOA that had sprung up like a weed in my quiet corner of the world. The homeowners association had been a thorn in my side since they'd moved in, with their manicured lawns and their endless complaints about my unkempt ranch. Unkempt. As if a man's home, carved from sweat and decades, could be reduced to a violation notice because my fence wasn't painted HOA-approved beige. Mr. Callahan, the lawyer began, his voice slick as oil, I'm here on behalf of Ms. Karen Whitaker and the Valley Pines Homeowners Association. We're filing a lawsuit against you for non-compliance with community standards, specifically regarding your property's aesthetic violations and the unauthorized use of your land for commercial purposes. He handed me a thick envelope, his fingers trembling slightly. Scout growled louder. I didn't take the envelope. I just stared at him, then at Karen, whose lips curled into a smirk that screamed she'd already won. Commercial purposes? I said, my voice low, the kind of calm that makes people nervous. You mean the hay I sell to local farmers? Or the horses I board for the neighbors who've been here longer than your HOAs existed? Karen stepped forward, her heels sinking into the dirt. Your ranch is an eyesore, Jack. It's bringing down property values. And don't get me started on that dog of yours barking at all hours. We're done asking nicely. You'll comply, or we'll take this place from you. I laughed. Not the polite kind, but the kind that rumbles up from your gut when someone's so far out of their depth they don't even know they're drowning. Karen, I said, you sent a lawyer to sue a man who spent 3 decades as Montana's Attorney General. You might want to rethink your strategy. Her smirk faltered, just for a second, but it was enough. I'd seen that look before on defendants who realized too late they'd picked the wrong fight. I took the envelope, not because I was worried, but because I wanted to see just how deep this rabbit hole went. The papers inside were a masterpiece of petty grievances. My barn was too red, my fence too rustic, my lifestyle too disruptive. They even cited Scout's barking as a public nuisance. Scout, who'd saved a lost hiker 2 winters ago by leading her to my porch. I handed the envelope back. You've got no case, I said. This land's been in my family since before Montana was a state. You think your HOA bylaws trump a century of deeds? Get off my property. Karen's face turned the color of her scarlet lipstick. This isn't over, Jack. You can't just ignore us. We're the future of this valley, and you're a relic. Relic, I repeated, stepping closer, my boots kicking up dust. That's what you call a man who's fought for every inch of this land? Who's buried family here? You're standing on my history, Karen, and you're about to learn what happens when you try to erase it. The lawyer tugged at her arm, sensing the tide turning, but Karen yanked free. You'll regret this, she hissed, before storming back to the SUV. As they peeled out, tires spitting gravel, Scout barked once, sharp and triumphant. I patted his head, my mind already racing through the legal arsenal I hadn't touched in years. This wasn't just about a fence or a barn. This was about people like Karen thinking they could steamroll anyone who didn't fit their vision of a perfect, sanitized world. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was scared hell, I'd faced down mob lawyers and corrupt politicians in my day, but because I was angry. Angry that my home, my sanctuary, was being attacked by someone who'd never understand what this land meant. My grandfather built this ranch with his bare hands, back when the valley was wild and the only law was survival. My father added the barn, painting it red because it was my mother's favorite color. I'd scattered their ashes in the wildflower field out back, promising to keep this place alive. And now Karen Whitaker thought she could erase that with a lawsuit. By morning, I was in my study, dusting off old law books and firing up my ancient laptop. The HOA's bylaws were public record, and I found them online within an hour. They were a mess of vague clauses and overreaching rules, the kind of document written by people who loved power but didn't understand it. I spotted at least 3 violations of state law in the first 10 pages. Karen's lawsuit wasn't just weak, it was a house of cards. I called my old friend Tom, a local judge who owed me a favor from back when I'd helped him out of a sticky ethics case. "Jack," he said, chuckling through the phone, "you're not seriously getting back in the game over an HOA, are you?" "They started it," I said. "I'm just finishing it." Over the next week, I built my case. I dug up every deed, survey, and historical record tied to my land. I found a 1923 easement that gave my family sole rights to the spring that fed half the valley's water, including Karen's precious McMansion. If she wanted a fight, I'd hit her where it hurt. I also reached out to the other old-timers in the valley, farmers and ranchers who'd been here as long as I had. They'd been getting HOA notices too, and they were mad. By the time I was done, I had a coalition of neighbors ready to back me up. The HOA's annual meeting was the next battleground. Karen and her board had booked the community center, expecting to ram through their agenda unchallenged. I showed up with my neighbors, a stack of documents, and Scout, who sat by my side like a furry paralegal. The room went quiet when we walked in. Karen was at the podium, mid-speech about elevating property standards, when she saw me. Her voice caught, just for a moment. "Excuse me," I said, standing up, my voice carrying the weight of 30 years in courtrooms. "I believe you're discussing my property. Care to explain why you think you can sue me for living on land my family's owned since before your HOA was a twinkle in some developer's eye?" The room erupted in murmurs. Karen's face flushed, but she recovered quickly. "Mr. Callahan, this meeting is for HOA members only." "You're not." "Wrong," I cut in, holding up the easement. "This document says my family controls the water rights to half this valley, including your properties. You sue me, I shut off your water. Legally. How's that for community standards?" The crowd gasped. Karen's lawyer, sitting in the front row, looked like he wanted to crawl under his chair. I kept going, laying out the flaws in their bylaws, the illegal overreach of their lawsuit, and the fact that I'd already filed a counterclaim with the state. "You picked the wrong fight," I said, locking eyes with Karen. "And you're about to lose." For a moment, I thought she'd back down. But Karen wasn't the type to surrender. She leaned into the microphone, her voice sharp. "You think you're untouchable because you were some big-shot lawyer? This valley's changing, Jack. You're either with us or you're gone." That was her mistake. The room turned on her. My neighbors, the ones she'd bullied with fines and notices, started shouting. Old Mrs. Hargrove, who'd lived here longer than me, stood up and called Karen a city slicker with no respect. Tom, the judge, was in the back, smirking. By the end of the night, the HOA board was in chaos, and Karen's lawsuit was on life support. But I knew it wasn't over. Karen didn't strike me as someone who'd go quietly. The next morning, I found my mailbox stuffed with a new notice, this time, a cease and desist demanding I stop harassing the HOA. Scout sniffed the paper and growled. I smiled. If Karen wanted a war, I'd give her one. Over the next month, the valley became a battleground. Karen rallied her HOA allies, pushing harder with fines, inspections, and petty complaints. I fought back with legal motions, public records requests, and a growing coalition of neighbors who were done with her tyranny. The local paper picked up the story, painting me as the grizzled underdog standing up to a soulless HOA. Karen hated that. She started showing up at my gate with new lawyers, new threats, each one more desperate than the last. One night, I caught her trespassing, taking photos of my barn like she was building a case for war crimes. Karen, I said, stepping out of the shadows with Scout at my side, you're on my land. Again. Care to explain? She froze, her phone still raised. I'm documenting violations, she snapped. This barn's a hazard. It's a landmark, I said. And you're breaking the law. Trespassing's a misdemeanor in Montana. Want to test me? She left without a word, but I saw the fear in her eyes. For the first time, she was starting to realize who she was up against. I wasn't just a rancher. I was a man who'd spent his life fighting for justice, and I wasn't about to let her destroy everything I'd built. The real turning point came when I uncovered the HOA's dirty secret. Digging through county records, I found evidence that their developer had bribed a local official to fast-track the subdivision, ignoring environmental regulations. The spring my family controlled. It was part of a protected watershed, and the HOA's McMansions were polluting it. I had them dead to rights. I filed a federal complaint, citing the Clean Water Act. The feds moved fast, and soon Karen's HOA was under investigation. Her allies started jumping ship, and her lawyers stopped returning her calls. By the time the case reached court, I was ready to bury her. I walked into the courtroom in my old suit, the one I'd worn when I was Attorney General, with Scout waiting outside like a sentinel. Karen sat across from me, her face pale, her confidence gone. The judge didn't even need to hear my full argument. The evidence was overwhelming. Her HOA had no legal standing to sue me, and their own violations were piling up. The case was dismissed, and Karen was ordered to pay my legal fees. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The courtroom victory should have been the end of it, but Karen Whitaker wasn't the type to slink away quietly. I'd seen her kind before, people who'd rather burn the world down than admit defeat. As I drove back to the ranch, Scout's head out the truck window, the Montana sky bruised with storm clouds, I knew this fight was far from over. Karen's silence after the judge's ruling wasn't surrender, it was strategy. And I'd learned long ago that the most dangerous opponents are the ones who stop talking. I got home and poured myself a whiskey, the good stuff I kept for nights like this. The amber liquid burned my throat, but it didn't dull the unease in my gut. Scout lay at my feet, his ears twitching like he could hear trouble coming from miles away. I pulled out the HOA's latest notice, the cease and desist that had arrived like a parting shot. It was flimsy, legally speaking, but it hinted at something darker. Karen was escalating. The question was how far she'd go. The answer came at dawn. I was out checking the horses when I saw smoke rising from the wildflower field. My heart stopped. That field wasn't just land, it was my family's heart, where I'd scattered my parents' ashes, where I'd promised to keep their memory alive. I ran toward it, Scout barking wildly at my heels. The fire was small but deliberate, a pile of dry grass and branches set ablaze near the old oak tree. Someone had been here, and I didn't need a law degree to know who. I grabbed a shovel and bucket from the barn, dousing the flames before they could spread. The damage was minimal, but the message was clear: Karen was playing dirty. I called the sheriff, an old friend named Mike who'd grown up fishing in my creek. He took one look at the scorched earth and shook his head. "Jack, you sure you want to poke this hornet's nest? That HOA's got money and lawyers." "So do I," said, kicking at the charred grass. "And I've got something they don't." Mike filed a report, but without witnesses or hard evidence. It was my word against hers. Karen would deny it, and her lawyer would spin it as an accident, maybe even try to pin it on me. I spent the rest of the day walking the property, checking fences, looking for signs of more sabotage. Scout stayed close, his nose low, like he was hunting for clues. I found a torn piece of fabric caught on a barbed wire fence near the field silk, expensive, the kind of thing Karen might wear. It wasn't enough for a conviction, but it was enough to fuel my resolve. By noon, the valley was buzzing with the news. My neighbors, folks like the Hargroves, who'd been at the HOA meeting, showed up with coffee and casseroles, their way of saying they had my back. Old man Hargrove, leaning on his cane, muttered, "That woman's trouble, Jack. Always has been. You watch yourself." "I'm watching," I said, but my mind was already 3 steps ahead. Karen's fire was a warning shot, but it was also a mistake. She'd given me an opening. I spent the afternoon in my study, pulling every string I had left from my days as Attorney General. I called in favors from old colleagues at the State Environmental Agency, pushing them to expedite the investigation into the HOA's watershed violations. I reached out to a reporter friend at the Montana Free Press, feeding her the bribery scandal I'd uncovered. If Karen wanted to play with fire, I'd bring the inferno. The next blow came a week later. Karen's HOA filed a new motion, this time claiming my ranch was operating an illegal, commercial enterprise, by hosting community events, things like the annual harvest barbecue I'd thrown for decades. It was a stretch, but they'd dug up old permits and twisted them to paint me as a scofflaw. I read the filing and laughed. They were grasping at straws, but the audacity of it stung. Those barbecues weren't business, they were tradition, a way to keep the valley together. Karen was trying to turn my home into a courtroom exhibit. I filed a countermotion, citing the same 1923 easement that gave me water rights. It also guaranteed my family's right to community gatherings on the land, a clause written when my great-grandfather hosted town meetings during the Great Depression. The HOA's case was flimsier than their last one, but it meant more legal fees, more time, more stress. Karen was betting I'd crack under the pressure. She didn't know me at all. That night, I sat on the porch, Scout's head in my lap, staring at the stars. The valley was quiet, but it felt like the calm before a storm. I thought about my father, how he'd taught me to fight for what's right, even when it's hard. "This land's your legacy, Jack," he'd said. "Don't let anyone take it from you." I wasn't about to let Karen Whitaker, with her manicured nails and her city money, erase that. The next morning, I got a call from Tom, the judge. "Jack, you've stirred up a wasp's nest," he said. "Karen's got friends in high places. Word is, she's pushing for an eminent domain claim. Says your ranch is a public nuisance and should be seized for community development." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. Eminent domain. The nuclear option. If the HOA could convince the county to declare my land a blight, they could force me to sell it for pennies. It was a desperate move, but a dangerous one. Karen wasn't just after my fence or my barn anymore, she wanted the whole damn ranch. I didn't panic. Panic's for people who don't know how to fight. Instead, I called a meeting with my neighbors at the community center. The room was packed: farmers, ranchers, even some of the newer folks who'd soured on the HOA's heavy-handed rules. I laid out the situation, the fire, the lawsuits, the eminent domain threat. I showed them the 1923 easement, the bribery records, the environmental violations. This isn't just about my ranch, I said. It's about all of us. If they can come for me, they can come for any of you. Mrs. Hargrove stood up, her voice shaking but strong. My family's been here since '49. We're not letting some outsider tell us how to live. The room erupted in agreement. By the end, we had a plan, a public campaign to rally the valley, a petition to block the eminent domain claim, and a class action counter-suit against the HOA for harassment and illegal practices. I'd lead the legal charge, but this was the valley's fight now. The next few weeks were a blur of motion. I was back in my element, drafting filings, meeting with reporters, speaking at town halls. The Montana Free Press ran a front-page story: Retired Attorney General Fights HOA Takeover of Historic Ranch. It went viral, picked up by national outlets. Suddenly, Karen wasn't just fighting mesh, was fighting public opinion. And the public wasn't on her side. But Karen didn't back down. She doubled down, hiring a PR firm to spin her as the victim, a concerned citizen, trying to modernize the valley. She held her own press conference, standing in front of her McMansion, crocodile tears in her eyes as she talked about preserving property values and protecting the community. It was a performance, and a good one. I almost admired her gall. Then came the sabotage. One morning, I found my water pump broken, the kind of damage that doesn't happen by accident. A few days later, someone cut my fence, letting half my horses loose. Scout and I spent hours rounding them up, my blood boiling with every step. Karen was hitting below the belt now, and I knew she'd deny everything. But I wasn't helpless. I installed security cameras, hired a private investigator, and kept every scrap of evidence. The silk fabric from the fire? I sent it to a lab for DNA testing. It was a long shot, but I wasn't leaving any stone unturned. The investigator, a sharp woman named Lena who'd worked with me back in my AG days, came through with a lead. She'd traced the bribery scandal to a developer named Victor Crane, a big shot from Bozeman who'd bankrolled Karen's HOA. Crane had a history of shady deals, and Lena found emails linking him to the county official who'd greenlit the subdivision. It wasn't just Karen anymore, this was a network, and I was ready to take it down. I filed a new motion, this time naming Crane and the HOA in a RICO claim, racketeering, the kind of charge that makes lawyers sweat. It was a bold move, but I had the evidence, the bribery records, the environmental violations, the pattern of harassment. If I could prove a coordinated effort to force me out, the HOA would collapse under its own weight. The day before the next court hearing, Karen showed up at my gate again. No lawyer this time, just her, standing there in a tailored coat, her face a mask of barely contained rage. Scout growled, but I called him off. "What do you want, Karen?" I asked, leaning against the fence. "I want you to stop," she said, her voice low. "You're tearing this valley apart. Sell the ranch. Move on. You're too old for this fight." I stepped closer, my eyes locked on hers. "You started this, Karen. You came after my home, my family's legacy. You think I'm too old? I've been fighting longer than you've been alive. You want to end this? Drop the lawsuits. Leave my land alone. She laughed, sharp and bitter. You're a fool, Jack. You think you're saving this valley? You're just delaying the inevitable. Progress always wins. Progress, I said, spitting the word. You call tearing down history progress? Get off my land. She left, but her words lingered. Progress. It was a lie, a shiny wrapper for greed. She didn't care about the valley, she cared about her bank account. But she'd underestimated me, and she'd underestimated this community. The hearing was a bloodbath. I presented the RICO claim, the bribery evidence, the environmental reports. Karen's new lawyer, a slick city type, tried to counter, but he was out of his depth. The judge, Tom's colleague, leaned forward, his eyes sharp. Ms. Whitaker, he said, your HOA's actions raise serious questions. I'm inclined to let Mr. Callahan's counterclaims proceed. Karen's face went white. Her allies in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. I didn't smile, I didn't need to. The truth was doing the work for me. That night, I thought it was over. I was wrong. The next morning, I woke to find my barn painted with the words, "Sell or else," in red. Scout was barking, frantic, and I knew this was Karen's last stand. She was cornered, and cornered animals are dangerous.